It is 2025, and a young woman opens fire on a Border Patrol agent, resulting in a shootout that kills both. It is 2022, and an up-and-coming crypto dealer is arrested, having lost millions of dollars worth of investor money. It is 2015, and a blogger has finally finished his 600,000-word work of Harry Potter fanfiction. It is 2014, and a tech billionaire is explaining his belief in using young people's blood to extend his lifespan. Did you know that every single thing I just mentioned is related? I'm being serious. Every weird, stupid, and tragic event I just described, they are all united by one common feature. Every single one of them involves an eclectic group of online communities that have been silently influencing the culture of Silicon Valley for decades. A group that has led to dozens of people being exploited, traumatized, and even killed. This group is known in academic circles as TESCREAL. TESCREAL is an acronym coined by its opponents Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres, describing a correlation of subcultures common in San Francisco and, by extension, the modern tech industry. These cultures are disorganized and diverse in thought, but believing in one means you likely believe in the others. These beliefs begin with admirable goals, but eventually turn to something that damages both yourself and the people around you. Let's start with the acronym. Transhumanism is a broad philosophy focused on transforming the human body, especially through scientific methods. Then there's extropianism, which for our purposes is just life extension and trying to optimize the human body like a computer. Next, cosmicism, which is philosophy surrounding the exploration of space. Lastly, and most importantly, singularitarianism refers to the singularity, the highly contentious theory that the rate of technological improvement will speed up faster and faster, turning into something humans can barely comprehend. The most common view of this in TESCREAL is that it's a godlike AI that will either create a heaven or a hell. Most of this is just harmless science fiction and not the main cause of the trauma or the killings. What sucks people into TESCREAL and taking in these ideas completely seriously is the acronym's second half. First, there's effective altruism, a philosophy crafted by Toby Ord and William McCaskill, seeking to maximize the effectiveness of charitable donations. This is appealing, but it's an idea that can easily descend into pet obsessions of nuclear war and AI gods, and away from curing disease or helping victims of war. This segues directly into long-termism, the philosophy that future lives are far more abundant than present ones, so if you want to act with maximum effectiveness, you should be focusing more on actions which help the future, rather than those that aid the present. Now, that sounds stupid, but has the appeal of allowing you to act sociopathically and self-interestedly while pretending to be helping, alongside convincing your employees to do the same. Finally, there's rationalism, an internet subculture formed by blogger Eliezer Yudkowsky, focused on unlearning biases, asking questions in order to figure out the most rational option, and acting on it. This sounds good until you realize that rational mostly means utilitarian, and trying to structure your own life that way means devaluing your own life in a way that can be very damaging. In addition, this and the whole TESCREAL package is very much online, and very much full of young people trying to figure out their own lives. Young people now ask questions which, due to the attention-driven nature of the modern internet, end up with answers which are less reasonable and more surprising, esoteric, and even completely self-destructive. All of this is made worse by the fact that Yudkowsky has major interests in the rest of TESCREAL, and blogs about it on his blog-turned-forum, Less Wrong. Eliezer Yudkowsky is probably the unifying factor of TESCREAL, and it's attracted massive amounts of attention over his 3 decades of works. He's proposed theories on artificial intelligence, human rationality, and how we should behave in order to become the best actor for the entire species. He has plenty of institutions sympathetic to him, ranging from CEOs like Sam Altman and Peter Thiel to newspapers like the New York Times and Time magazine. He has done all of this in spite of the fact that he's a high school dropout who believes AI will suddenly become hyper-intelligent, take control of the world's weapons, torture mankind in simulating hell dimension, and that this must be stopped by any means necessary. I wasn't being hyperbolic with the AI gods. This is something Yudkowsky is very serious about, and something other Tuscarelians firmly believe is a looming and ever-present threat. Imagine if you lived your life thinking that. It never starts with the hell dimensions or singularity, however. It always begins, on Less Wrong or on Twitter, with simple discussions of how things can and should be, and how to behave in a way that is better for the world as a whole. This involves a lot of philosophy by random people online, one of which leads to the discussion of Newcomb's paradox. This is a philosophical problem where, quoting Jeff Speaks, there are two boxes before you, box A and box B. You have a choice as to whether you can only take the contents of box B, or can take the contents of box A and box B. The predictor has placed $1,000 in box A. If the predictor predicts that you will take only box B, he has placed $1 million in box B. If the predictor predicts that you will take the contents of both boxes, he has placed nothing in box B. You have observed that in the past the predictor is right every time. If your aim is to maximize your money, should you choose to take the contents of box B alone or the contents of both boxes? Now, in most normal situations, this is a harmless and silly thought experiment to discuss at parties. Less Wrong's users don't do that. Instead, they try to solve the problem through timeless decision theory, which you have to act consistently your entire life in order to somehow win the thought experiment. This seems almost irrelevant to Newcomb's problem itself, but remember that a big part of rationalism is asking weird questions to get weird and often hard to understand answers. There is an insistence in applying those answers to tangible reality, and that using those lessons is critically important to, in a very real way, saving the entire planet. Part of this insistence on weird and complex solutions is a cultural issue specific to, of all things, Silicon Valley startup culture. In that culture, when someone is attempting to start a startup, you're in a market with thousands of other people and need any way to stand out. Startup founders, often being experienced people in their 20s and 30s, often state incredibly outlandish premises for apps and services to stand out. Once it's funded, the person has to keep escalating the premise in order to keep shareholders expecting to see their payout, even if premises become downright impossible to fulfill. Why is this relevant? Simple. Alicia Yudkowsky lives in the Bay Area, as do most of his friends and role models, and that way of thinking very easily trickles into Less Wrong, which trickles into the wider Tuscarel community by extension, at which point it becomes easy for any young person to try, in vain, to act on it. Tuscarel is everywhere in Silicon Valley, too. Look at Peter Thiel. Thiel, in recent years, has been mocked for his Antichrist obsession, rightly, but his Tuscarel roots aren't far away. His demands that we accelerate AI, regardless of its effect on the climate, that's something he argues by deflecting the issue of climate change and instead focusing on the effective altruist concerns of nuclear bombs and bioweapons. In addition, his interests lean towards the extropian, cryonics, tech-induced immortality, and infamously considering replacing his blood with that of younger men. This is mostly just funny, but it's also the trait of someone trying to optimize himself in combination with wanting an intense level of control over both himself and others. Those tie into rationalist and even effective altruist perspectives, and one that can become deeply poisoned if matched with, say, someone who's extremely paranoid and has a general sense of unease, both of which apply to the highly conservative and incredibly wealthy Thiel. So what does Thiel do? He funds politicians who are friendly to his goals, preaches to Christians that environmentalists are in league with the Antichrist, and helps fund software which is built to survey and track populations en masse. I can't help but believe that if Tuscarel's culture didn't exist, we may not have ended up with Palantir. That's not the only rich guy. There's Marc Andreessen, who describes himself as a Tuscarelist, doing my own arguing for me. Furthermore, he published a manifesto called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto on the Andreessen Horowitz website. Most of the manifesto is stuff we've already talked about, with AI gods and whatnot. but becomes unsettling when the essay gets to an enemies section, a section which claims that anyone trying to stop the progress of AI development is an enemy of the species. This may concern you because Andreessen is the co-owner of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the wealthiest venture capital firms on the planet. But don't worry, he's also the co-owner of social media platform software Ning, fan of Italian fashion. But let's say you're not convinced yet. Think that these are just two weird guys with weird beliefs about robots, and beliefs alone aren't enough to harm somebody. What matters is taking those beliefs into action, like Elon Musk has. Not only has Musk described his morality as being close to effective altruism, he is a cosmicist, whether or not he knows that word. The mission of SpaceX is to bring people to other planets. While this obsession of his has been dismissed as standard behavior for the eccentric genius, that's small comfort for the people he affects on the ground. Literally, SpaceX launches hundreds of rockets every year, in part because of Musk's interstellar ambitions, and that leads to dozens of exploding rockets whose debris can fall near and around the surrounding southern neighborhoods. So we have a man who, under the influence of science fiction ideas of space travel, is willing to assault someone's house with fire-drenched shrapnel and view that as a worthy sacrifice. You probably noticed how this went from goofy grown men playing Terminator to somebody's home being bombarded by debris. That's the thing with TESCREAL. The first half of the beliefs are so strange that it's very easy to get caught up with the AI god or the Mars colonies. But when I say that people have been hurt by this, it's not just the people stuck with Musk or Thiel. I was talking about young people, wide-eyed and wanting to help the world, being entrapped by those stronger than them, and leaving mentally scarred at best, and more often much, much worse. Let's start with the story you probably know the most about, Sam Bankman-Fried. The common story of Bankman-Fried is of a rising cryptocurrency star who got thousands to invest in his firm FTX before losing everybody's money and going to federal prison. This is accurate but misses the fine details, and specifically misses how ideology plays into Bankman-Fried's accumulation of wealth and eventual fall. Not only was he a self-described effective altruist, he had a love of rationalist logic problems and implementing the lessons from those problems into real life. He would tell reporters his own personal game theory situation, where he's provided a coin that can either double the world's resources or destroy all creation. Effective altruist he is, he said he would flip the coin every single time, risking all of mankind for the resources. If you think that's a stretch, you should know what got him into crypto in the first place. As an MIT student in 2013, he asked the nearby intellectuals where to take his life in a way that can help the world. It was William MacAskill who advised the younger man to get a high-paying finance job and give money away. So, MacAskill, a founding effective altruist, arguably the effective altruist, served as a direct inspiration for Bankman-Fried's career. It's not just economic mistreatment either. Charlotte Alter's effective altruism promises to do good better. These women say it has a toxic culture of sexual harassment and abuse. Discusses 7 examples of effective altruists enabling sexual assault. However, their most prominent one is a story of a house, one full of TESCREAL adherents pulling money to keep up with San Francisco rent prices. One of the 2 co-leaders, a woman, was told about sexual misconduct of her male counterpart. The issue was discussed by the house's members in a Google Doc, full of TESCREAL lingo and raw mathematics, attempting to quantify the value of an alleged sex pest and often judging in his favor. This is not meathead or jock logic or locker room talk. This is a group of people using very reasonable sounding language, calmly trying to excuse sexual assault because they believe the male co-leader is necessary for managers 5. It's using a high stakes and hypotheticals to justify the mistreatment of women. The ability to use TESCREAL's logic to justify abuse is not a rarity. As an example, Black Lotus started out as a Burning Man-style festival formed by a man named Brent Dill, but began to mutate into something more all-encompassing. Dill constructed a shared framework based on the popular card game Magic the Gathering to promote his ideology, one where members outside Black Lotus had their actions and behavior dissected on a rationalist level, one where any challenge to his leadership was taken apart, using pseudo-psychology to reveal true intentions, usually of an insidious variety, one where Dill could, allegedly, assault and rape young women. Dill was at best an awful man and at worst a cult leader. Dill was also, until 2019, a major contributor to a rationalist institution called the Center for Applied Rationality, or CFAR. It had been working with CFAR since 2015, and Dill specifically was working on projects made specifically for high school students. For the record, TESCREAL is not new, or something that can be blamed on social media, or even something blamed on rich people being self-absorbed weirdos. Many TESCREAlians had questionable beliefs before becoming part of the movement. Elon Musk's time in South Africa is well known. Peter Thiel helped sustain anti-democratic extremist Curtis Yarvin, and Scott Alexander, a notable blogger in the sphere, has openly supported racist pseudoscience. TESCREAL attracts very, very bad people, and its initial reasonable goals are incredibly useful tools for those bad people to use to justify abuse and negligence. What's a few damaged homes for a space future? What's climate change to someone making an AI god? What's a few hurt women in exchange for saving the world? TESCREAL focuses the fate of not just your community or even your country, but the fate of the world, or the universe, or the multiverse, if you believe you can make God, the ceiling is infinite. So, people discuss this. They get deeper into these communities, and are likely to learn the more esoteric ideas. They become invested in maximizing utility, it's all they want to talk about, and it can make talking to them strange at best, and outright obnoxious at worst. This may be calling to mind movements like Trumpism and its corollary QAnon, and similar to those movements, TESCREAL's rhetorical function can lead to participants only talking to other TESCREAlians. It's a place where vulnerable people can take the rhetoric of saving the world and convince each other to tolerate or even commit horrible actions. Anything to save the world. Unlike movements like Stalinism or Trumpism, it doesn't necessarily require you to elevate yourself. It's a self-absorbed ideology, yes, but not a self-loving one. TESCREAL is paradoxically an ideology which states that your brain can be optimized to enact borderline supernatural change, and one where that level of change is used to serve particularly and purely utilitarian needs. Again, for those deep in the sauce, this is their primary social circle. Whether they be a billionaire or a borderline homeless woman living on a boat, TESCREAlians are in a social circle where they have both complete domain to act as themselves and, paradoxically, the sense that who they are is not yet perfect. For some, they come to the conclusion that they will never be perfect, and thus become either useless to, or actively detrimental to the cause of creating the big friendly AI god. So, hypothetically, if you're a young person with no social life and an unfriendly family, and have become obsessed with all these esoteric ideas, you are in the perfect position to give up any monetary or personal autonomy you have to someone willing to completely take over your life. Or, alternatively, you could decide your life is worth less than zero, and fix this dilemma by, as some members did and have done, ending your own life. Maybe you think I'm being too harsh, or that all these examples can't be blamed on TESCREAL, or making a mountain of a molehill. But even if everything I just said isn't exclusive to TESCREAL, it still enables the worst aspects of hero fantasies and insecurities about one place in the world. And to explain where all of this ends up, we have to talk about something darker. We have to talk about where all of this leads to. We have to talk about Oblivion. We have to talk about Ziz. Ziz, an Alaskan native and a daughter of an AI researcher, was exposed to technology and its intersection with ethics from an age far younger than most of us. She became a vegan as a child. She hacked her school's computer to mess with her teacher's pay. And as an intern at NASA, designed a tool for space weather analysis. But despite her genuine skill and intelligence, she struggled to find community in real life. So she went to a place where her interest of ethics and technology would intersect. And she could be open about herself in spite of how weird she assumed herself to be. The less wrong forums, where no idea is left on the table. The rationalists did help her in some respects. She obtained friends, began writing a blog that got plenty of attention, and it perhaps let her come out of the closet and meet other trans women like her. But the bad in this movement outweighs the good. Remember Newcomb's paradox and the timeless decisions theory guff from earlier? When Ziz was making a name for herself, she found a version of that theory where, if a person is in conflict with someone else, they have to make the timeless decision to respond with intense aggression. That way, through a series of logic I don't understand, nobody would ever try to hurt you. This tends not to help anybody, because real life is not a thought experiment, and thus it does not help Ziz. Ziz, frustrated with community college and her lack in progress in actually improving her life, emailed CFAR leader Anna Solomon for advice. Solomon advises that Ziz abandon college, move to California, and start a successful startup company in order to give money to rationalist charities. Now, this ignores the fact that not having a college degree in the tech industry is like going into a product pit with a filet mignon as a necklace. But Ziz agrees to this, and packs her bags to the Bay Area, making one of the worst decisions of her entire life. Bay Area housing, as anyone who lives there will tell you, is unaffordable to anyone who is not rich. Ziz is not rich. She's stuck and unable to get a job, and is forced to do what the Tescaralians mentioned in the Time article did, and share a home with other Tescaralians who she's only talked to online. Some rationalists do accommodate trans people, but her roommates did not, verbally ostracizing her and making her go even deeper into the more esoteric and angrier sides of both rationalism and Tumblr. Unable to perfect herself and struggling to get a job, she attends another CFAR event, hoping to find a solution to her problems, and ends up in the hands of what appear to be CFAR salespeople. She asks them point blank if they think she's a net negative to the universe, someone who would only hurt everybody around her. They respond, yes, that they thought they did, and provided her a solution. Come to 5 more seminars and learn how to be better. I include this specifically to highlight how predatory this entire culture is. Convincing a young, vulnerable woman that her life may be bad for all of reality, and then offering her salvation in the form of a seminar. But Ziz does not take this offer. Instead, to avoid rising rent prices on the land, she gets a boat and takes to the sea. She's not alone in this. She's joined by other trans people and trans-friendly rationalists who fell in love with her writing on her blog. This includes Maximilian Snyder, Somni Lethem, and most importantly for our purposes, Gwen Danielson. Danielson shares a theory to Ziz about a topic that neither have the experience nor authority to discuss responsibly: brain hemispheres. Danielson believed that the 2 spheres of the brain can have different personalities and even different values, and are often in conflict with each other. Ziz takes this belief and adds the idea that if you wish to rectify flaws in yourself, you can sleep with one hemisphere of the brain while keeping the other awake, putting you in a state where flaws can be more easily addressed. Even a critic of Ziz and fellow rationalist who coined the term Zizian, a person named Paul Mojave, believed in this. Quote, "Normally it is not possible for human beings to sleep with only one hemisphere. However, a weak form of unihemispheric sleep, or UHS, can be achieved by simulating one half of the body and resting the other. Like hypnosis or fasting, this is a vulnerable psychological state for a person. Entering UHF requires the sleeper to be exhausted. It also has disorienting effects, so they are not quite themselves. In practice, this means an intense reduction in actual sleep. There are ways to survive with only one hemisphere of your brain. You can't actually do that, though, without getting some major invasive surgery done. Ziz and Danielson aren't doing that, thankfully, but what they are doing is staying half awake for entire nights at a time, ruminating on all their least favorite parts of themselves, and convincing themselves of things under the influence of sleep deprivation. So, at this point, there's a group of anxious, isolated, and financially desperate young people sailing on barely livable boats, full of resentment and anger towards a world that doesn't want them there. And now they've begun to deprive themselves of sleep, putting them in a state where they can accept nearly anything. While they're cooking up these ideas and depriving themselves of sleep, this group is discussing all the ways they've been let down. The rationalists they had known for years had rejected both them and these new ideas. Many of their family members were distant and slow to accept them, and it's easy to convince each other that their families were outright abusive. All the while discussing how to become more agentic, capable of preventing the rise of all-powerful AI. Not only that, but they're doom scrolling, a practice that would likely be honed by their existing habits of reading long blog posts. The people around them spend hours writing these posts, and the posts are well over 10,000 words long, and dissecting all of the ideas takes so much time, so they're spending a lot of time on social media. Except now, they've taken this mentality into more short-form and outrage-based social media on places like Tumblr, just with the attitude of trying to solve it. The problem is that situations like drone strikes or government corruption are things that are typically solved through widespread and complicated action, not by the special boy or special girl who take the individualistic Tescarelian attitude of self-optimizing yourself with your friends. In 2019, Ziz finally thought she'd try to help the world with her friends, specifically by going against CFAR, which she believed was enabling sexual predators. In an attempt to take on the institution, Ziz grabbed Danielson, Leatham, and a third friend, Emma Borhanian, and brought them out to a CFAR seminar in order to protest the groups. They dressed in dark, almost Sith-like robes, and were appropriately rebellious Guy Fawkes masks. However, while CFAR expected Ziz and her friend's strangeness, CFAR hadn't warned those running the convention center. So, when these convention employees see 4 people in dark robes standing outside their center, they mistakenly believe they have weapons and call the police. When the police arrive and find a peaceful protest, they begin to ask questions of the 4. These 4 confrontational, sleep-deprived, traumatized people begin to confuse and alarm the policemen because they don't respect the police. The police respond by shoving the group to the ground, performing a full-body pat-down on each one of them, and taking them into custody to be charged with felony conspiracy, which would ultimately stretch out into San Francisco court. It's here where I would like to take time to note something about Ziz and her clique, derisively known as the Zizians. People are quick to apply labels like trans vegan cult in an attempt to explain why they are the way they are in a quick and headline-friendly way. To me, it's not quite accurate, as even though Ziz was a major figure, I found no real evidence that Ziz directly ordered any members of her social group to do anything past this protest. And the term trans vegan cult is like calling Jim Jones the leader of a black communist cult. That's accurate, but that's not quite the same thing. And to me, they're not even on the level of Jim Jones or Charles Manson. They're more like those kids from high school, the ones who are left alone at lunch, not because they're nerds or just because they don't fit in, but because the things they talk about are regularly deeply upsetting to everybody else but them. Zizians are those kids, frozen in time, finding each other across the internet, and incubated into spaces where never growing out of the high school levels of petty self-righteousness is actively encouraged. And right here, at this protest, is where I ask for you to understand what those kids have been through. A group of dumb 20-somethings, deep sleep-deprived and awash with anger, have been convinced by each other that the world is an awful place. One that's full of people who hate their identities, who hate their ideas, and will willingly throw the world into the apocalypse in order to accomplish their goals. Tescriel, meanwhile, convinces them that their interests have world-shattering consequences, which has been unproven, and yet has been entirely consuming their time for what seems to be well over a year by this point. They have been stewing in the sea of aimless anger and paranoia, and have finally chosen to do something about that. And right here, through the cops, they are given a response of direct force, an invasive full-body search, and a drawn-out legal battle that they are nowhere near prepared to handle. They are given confirmation of everything they are afraid of. You know when you don't want something to happen, and then it does, in a very rare situation, but because it happened at all, your brain is almost programmed to expect it again? That's what happened to these guys. Yeah. That legal battle I mentioned earlier, that's where things truly go off the rails. The Zizians are terrible at handling court cases, and with all their lingo, they can barely communicate with their public defender. This writings at this point become obsessed with death and revenge. The Zizians are forced to move out of their boats to a series of box trucks, owned by a landlord named Curtis Lind. Then COVID-19 strikes, meaning that their already atrophied social life is restricted solely to either talking online or with each other. Conflicts between Ziz and one of her friends, Jamie Zashko, begin to rise in tension, and then Danielson leaves the group entirely, faking their death apparently, with their status not really known to this very day. Ziz, following their lead, to escape the legal drama, fakes her own death, forcing her to go underground. And by November 2022, they've become so awash in ideology that they believed it'd be, quote, poor praxis, or bad praxis, to pay Curtis Lind rent. Lind, understandably in my opinion, does not tolerate this, and after 2 extensions, asks the Zizians to leave his property. The day of the deadline, one person asks if Lind could examine something in one of the trucks. Lind obliges, and is struck in the back of the head with something, before blacking out. He wakes up later, with a Japanese sword through his stomach, blind in one eye, and with 4 figures at his side. These figures are Letham, Borhanian, a younger member nicknamed Suri Dao, and Ziz herself, still on the property. Lind, understandably terrified out of his mind, pulls out his pistol and fires, killing Borhanian and injuring Letham. The police are called, Letham and Dao are arrested, and Ziz is left unaddressed. There are no further writings on Ziz's blog. The whole incident flies under the national radar for the next 3 years, because how do you explain that? Then, in January 2025, German immigrant Ophelia Bockholt and missing individual Teresa Youngblunt check into a hotel in Vermont. A hotel worker reports them concerned about their all-black tactical clothing and Youngblunt carrying a gun. The police begin investigating them, and eventually the Border Patrol chooses to join in. A few days later, when the patrol tries to pull them over, one of the women opened fire, leading to a shootout where Bockholt and an agent are killed. Word spreads of this, and Bockholt's duplex in North Carolina is investigated, where evidence of her obsession with Ziz's theories are found. This elevates a similar incident that happened a few days earlier, in California, where Curtis Lind is murdered by Maximilian Snyder, and Snyder is arrested soon after. Lind's family have set up a GoFundMe and are still trying to cover funeral expenses. The 22-year-old Snyder sends out a manifesto pleading his innocence, full of TESCREAL and rationalist lingo, Dungeons and Dragons slang, and a message directly asking Alicia Yudkowsky to embrace veganism. Can I tell you a story, not about Ziz, but about me? When I was younger, I spent far too much time online, scrolling social media and watching YouTube videos. During that time, I saw stuff that made me angry about politicians and pollution and movies and how the entire world was getting worse. And I spread this information and talked about it with my friends and family, because something had to be done, anything had to be done. It didn't matter if the information was bunk. I wasn't going to check their sources after all. Not only that, but I didn't value myself. At all. I've only had a few jobs in my life. I'm slow to work on the art I'm passionate about. And I've only recently met somebody who I could call a girlfriend. Social media use didn't help. I had no social media presence to build a platform off of. Nothing comparable to the micro-celebrities who've risen to world-renowned status at my age, or even younger. All the while, my dad has kept trying to push me to improve myself, to fix my sleep schedule, to become a functional human being, which is not abuse. It's him trying to help me. But with some exceptions, I just couldn't do it, even in my early 20s. And it was hard to see the successes I was getting. Because the more I failed to reach that standard, the more I kept devaluing myself, desperate to either reach a standard I could never reach, or give myself an escape. Maybe if I hid away, I could be less inconvenient to others. Maybe if I ignore my health, I can make more interesting art. Maybe if I just killed myself, my dad wouldn't have to suffer seeing me. In essence, I was a lonely, socially awkward, deeply closeted young person who was deeply upset about the state of the world, often based on incorrect information, and desperate to become impressive, or at least help the world in some way, even at the expense of my own life, which I valued only in what I could cut out of myself. In a world where just a few things were different, I would be just like Ziz. And if you're listening to this, maybe while procrastinating on school or work, you're probably a lot like her too. Ziz, Dill, Bankman-Fried, even Musk are much closer to us than we would like to imagine. If your takeaway from this video is that these are just silly people we should just ignore or dismiss as freaks, then I've failed in my mission. What I want you to understand is that not only are the ideologies of TESCREAL far more influential than they ever should have been, but that it's easy for them to conceal the more noxious parts of themselves because they hide in the language of self-improvement and becoming a more effective member of the workforce. If you're willing to put your all into a tech startup at the expense of your self-esteem and even personal health, it'd be trivial to convince you to kill your friend's landlord. It's probably too late for the Elon Musks of the world, but there are ways people like you and I can avoid falling down these spirals. For a start, you may want to avoid blogs like Less Wrong or a corollary blog, Slate Star Codex. If you see social media communities using terms like agentic or talking about transforming their body through robotics, stay away. Second, if you're interested in these topics, or at least find the community appealing, please find a different one. There are other places to explore these topics, philosophy book clubs, local amateur astronomers, even just a small circle of real-life friends to discuss thought experiments with. If you want to make yourself more useful to charities, just volunteer directly. These options provide everything TESCREAL can, but better. Third, stop treating people in the tech world as geniuses. If you refer to Musk or Yudkowsky or anyone else as a genius, or even just an expert, it gives the impression that have things worth listening to. Furthermore, their importance to social media makes the idea of their genius easy to spread. But ultimately, these guys are just good at programming and business. Those are skills, but they're not transferable skills to psychology or sociology. You can't be perfect. You might have to start something new after investing a lot in a previous thing. And you might have to learn to deal with your existing flaws. And that's fine. Even if it was possible to be supremely agentic and save the whole world, a world where one person can change the lives of billions is one you do not want to live in. I'm not going to pretend that I can tell you how to live your life. I'm not wise enough to say that. But anything is better than TESCREAL. Anything else.